What is up, everybody? This is the Sharp Angles podcast, the final Rich and Ray Sharp Angles podcast of 2023. Man, what a time to be alive. I hadn't even thought about that until I just thought to say it right there. I'm Ray Summerlin. We're going to talk about the week 17 fantasy football slate, the championship week for
Ooh.
many teams, not for any of mine. We can talk about that here in just a second. But to help you get over the finish line, to help you get that championship, I will be joined by the one, the only, Mr. Rich Hribar. How you doing, Rich?
We're doing good. Yeah, it's the end of the year. The NFL is giving us all these games on Christmas Eve. So or not Christmas Eve, that already happened, but New Year's
Yeah,
Eve
New Year's
this week.
Eve.
So and we can kind of just go out and do stuff because Vikings Packers is the closing game.
Yeah, I will definitely be at a New Year's Eve party for that game. I will not be glued to the television. I'm sure it will be on wherever I am, but I will not be glued to the television for that
Last
for
year,
that
the New
amazing
Year's
game.
Eve was the college football semifinals, and I remember Ohio State was literally kicking that try to win the game, that field goal, as the ball dropped, and a bunch of people, a bunch of spouses and girlfriends with us, were like, "We're trying to watch this," and it's like, "We're trying to watch this," we're trying to see what happens. It was literally simultaneous.
They did that a couple years in a row. I don't think they did it last year, right? But they did it a couple years in a row, and it never really made sense to me about why does the NFL have a game that night? Wouldn't it have been better to just have a Monday night game? Because I
Right.
guess they would go up against the championship games in the NCAA. But who's watching really? That's even a championship game. Who's watching Vikings versus Packers if you're not a Vikings or Packers fan? You're not doing that. It's New Year's Eve. So they may have taken it a little too far. They may have bitten off finally a little more than they could chew. They were able to beat the NBA on Christmas Day, just completely rip Christmas Day away from the NBA viciously. The NFL did, but I don't know about this New Year's Eve night game. But you know what? It's the NFL. I bet a bunch of people watch it. We were actually talking about before the podcast where we got in here. I think it's really funny that we've gotten to this part of the season, and I think you and I, all of our conversations now revolve around the things that we were happy to do in January. That's the only thing we talk about now is getting to January, the video games we're going to get to play, the shows and movies that we've missed that we're going to get
Mhm.
to watch. That's the only thing that we're excited about by this point in the season. So if you're in the chat, or if you're watching us live on YouTube, which you can, by the way, every Thursday, 11:30 Eastern, we're going to keep doing this through the playoffs. Come and join us on YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Warren Sharp, subscribe. You'll get notified when we go live. Hit us up with some games, some movie recs, books, maybe. I don't know. Do you read? Who reads anymore? Who has time to read, Rich? You read anything?
No, no. I mean, maybe some audiobooks. We'll do little audiobooks. I still do read comics and graphic novels, so I still do those. But that's through the Marvel unlimited subscription and stuff like that. So it's still kind of reading on an iPad.
Yeah. My only version of actual intellectual content is watching videos, 30-minute videos about ancient battles on YouTube from a channel called History March, which I do regularly. And I always get snide remarks from the people in my house. But you know what? It's interesting. It's interesting to know how all of this went down. Anyway, so we're going to talk this week about obviously week 17 of the fantasy football. We're going to try to do some real or fake. It's hard to do that. We don't have many weeks left here, but we're going to try to do a little bit of that. Then obviously we'll talk about a few of the games, and then we'll do our uncut gems. I guess we should get started here with real or fake with the Chiefs, who a team that I've been talking about for a long time, going, this offense is not quite right, and now the offense is really not quite right, despite the fact that Rashee Rice has developed into maybe not exactly the number one wide receiver they need, but he has developed into a real option at wide receiver, which they didn't have last season. They now have that. And even so, their offense just continues to struggle. Obviously, their offense gave up the points that ended up losing them the game on Christmas Day against the Raiders. Their defense did their job, continues to do their job. And so you look at this Chiefs, you're like, all right, well, I'm not going to trust them in my championship game, even if I was able to make it there with them, which, to be honest, if you drafted Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, there's a decent chance you didn't actually make it to the
Probably not.
championship game. But then you look at the matchup. Then you look at the fact that they're playing the Bengals, and you had a run in your worksheet for this game, in which you said we're talking about how bad they were, just various examples of how bad this defense is, and it is that bad. And I guess just we have to go back to the well this week. If in DFS, if you have them somehow in redraft and you're playing in your championship, like I think we just have to go back to the well because I think this defense is just that bad.
Yeah, I think the most gamers, if they're there, obviously if you just have Travis Kelce and you're still alive, you're just playing Travis Kelce, right? Like you're not picking up another tight end to like stream for Travis Kelce. If you've had Rashee Rice through this 5-week run where the Chiefs actually decided to play him as a full-time wide receiver and he's operating as a legit receiver, you're just continuing to play him. That's the good thing about the Chiefs, even that they've been bad. Like it's very clear who to play. I think the fulcrum point gamers are going to have this week is if Isaiah Pacheco doesn't play. How trustworthy is Clyde Edwards-Helaire going to be against this defense that is completely been just gashed by running backs? I mean, we saw the Minnesota Vikings 2 weeks ago, a team that has not been able to run the football basically the entire season. Ty Chandler comes in and has, he's absolutely just ripping runs against the Bengals. I mean, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is an objectively bad football player. He has been awful. He has a 25% success rate running the football.
Yep.
He's 60th out of 63 running backs with 50 or more carries this season. The only running backs with the worst success rate than him are Jamal Williams, Damian Pierce, and Dalvin Cook. He has 4 runs of 10 or more yards on 68 carries. That's 56th rate of explosive runs out of the same group. I mean, but the Bengals, 4.5 yards per carry to running backs, 28th in the NFL, 14.2 rushing points per game, 22nd in the NFL. Is Clyde Edwards-Helaire going to go down in infamy? Is he getting all those first round draft picks where gamers took Clyde Edwards-Helaire over Jonathan Taylor in their rookie drafts? Is this a retribution week to win fantasy titles?
It might be. And so when I look at this game and I'm trying to think of why aren't the Chiefs going to get there? The first reason they cannot get there is this offense might just be dysfunctional. That might be the case. It wasn't like they played a great defense last week either, and it still didn't really work out. Although the Raiders' defense is definitely better than this Bengals defense, and it hasn't worked out for a long time. I mean, Mahomes has been a QB1 one game over his last 7. Kelce is the tight end 10 in per game scoring over his last 8 games with 1 touchdown. It might just be bad, and even though they're playing the Bengals, it is bad. But my other concern here is that this offense works. We see what it kind of did the first game against the Raiders. They went down big against the Raiders and then scored a bunch of points and were able to kind of put that game away. But the Bengals against this Chiefs defense, that is still, really good, are not able to put the points on the board they need to push them. But for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, that actually might be a good outcome. If Isaiah Pacheco is not in this game, then that's going to lead to him stacking runs. And if he's stacking runs against this defense particularly, then we're going to like his chances. I mean, we saw what Najee Harris was able to do last week against this team. And I don't think CEH is that much lower in the pecking order than Najee Harris is, right? And so this game script, if it kind of goes that way, if the Bengals aren't able to score, if Jamar Chase is out and T. Higgins is being shut down as the number 1 receiver because this Chiefs defense shuts down number 1 receivers and they're not able to move the ball that well, then maybe we're going to see CEH just kind of stack carries. And at that point, I guess you just have to ride it and say, all right, let's hope for the best.
Yeah, I mean, CEH is definitely, if we don't get Pacheco, I mean, he's from a workload perspective as a home favorite, everything's there. Like objectively, you would say, I don't even care about playing a bad football player. This is where we play running backs. Like this is just a spot we play running backs.
What about, so let's not talk about like, if you're playing like 150 lineups, obviously we'll have some Mahomes. Let's say if you're a single entry or 3 max kind of DFS player, are you going to go back to stacking Mahomes, get Kelce, get Rice in there? Are you confident enough that this could be a really good spot for them? Or are you still kind of a little bit worried and think that there might be better options on the board if you're playing those single entry or 3 max DFS contests this week?
I still think you can, depending where ownership tracks, just because the way the context of the slate looks, it looks like a lot of gamers are going to play George Kittle. It looks like George Kittle is going to be really popular on this slate. So you do get an inherent pivot. I will say, though, it is hard to pay up for Kelce again. I mean, his price just has him and Stephon Diggs, right? Like two guys, their price just is a Gibraltar. Like it doesn't move. It doesn't matter like the runs that they've been on. You still have to pay for those two guys, and you're not getting the return on those salaries. And it's even worse when you pay for the highest price tight end, because it foregoes you being able to spend salary at running back and wide receiver. And there are some really good running backs and wide receivers to play this week. So is like Travis Kelce going to prevent me from being able to get to a guy like Kyron Williams, to get to a guy like Christian McCaffrey, to get to a Tyreek Hill, to get to another wide receiver I want to play? That's what makes it harder. I do think it is an interesting spot for those small field tournaments, though, to do like a Kelce one-off. Or Rashee Rice is just, I think, going to be a core player anyways for a lot of people where he's priced.
Absolutely.
But Kelce is the one guy you have like the fulcrum point on, because the salary investment at his position is restrictive for lineup building overall.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I also don't think, though, that I want Mahomes in my lineup without Kelce, and then that becomes really difficult to kind of get through. And so, yeah, it's going to be interesting. But everything you just laid out might mean that they're not popular, and this is an objectively very good spot for them. And I think these two players are still good, and so maybe that's the argument for them as well.
I do think as your field size increases, though, you need to have other avenues away from Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Yeah, absolutely, because he's going to be on a lot of rosters, I'd imagine, this week if Pacheco is out, which I can't imagine Pacheco is able to clear concussion protocol. I mean,
at this point, I don't know. Everyone clears at this point now. It's week 17. They're like, hell, we need these guys. Push them through.
Yeah, I actually tweeted that last week when Lawrence got cleared. I was like, the doctor said, all right, let me look at these standings. Yeah, it looks like you're clear. Go out there and play. That's kind of where we are. It has seemed to be a bit of a joke lately, but we'll see how it goes. All right, let's move on and talk a little bit about Bryce Young. Bryce Young, we made all the jokes. We've made the jokes all year about Bryce Young and how bad it's gone. But we have to talk about, he's coming off of the best game of his career, and quietly against the Falcons the week before, he was not bad. He did not have the counting stats. He didn't have the fantasy stats, but he was not bad. Prior to the last two games, Bryce Young was completing 58.5% of his passes for 5.3 yards per attempt, with one game in that run over 6.5 yards per attempt. In the last two games, he's completed 68.3% of his passes for 8 yards per attempt and has been at or above 7 yards per attempt in both games. We have actually seen a decent version of Bryce Young the last couple of weeks. And you might say, okay, well, the matchup was good. The Packers defense is bad, and not being able to stop Bryce Young is definitely a red flag for that defense. But the Jaguars defense is also bad. It's probably worse against the pass than the Packers defense. I'm not saying that we're going to go in on Bryce Young in DFS, because I don't know what the ceiling is. He was still just the QB9 last week. Right. But I am suddenly more interested in the wide receivers in this passing game in DFS than I thought I would ever be this year. Is that wild? Like, what am I going the wrong way here, or what do you think about this?
Well, that's been the key for the wide receivers. So the pass game's been so anemic that only one guy could have okay stats, like Adam Thielen, right? Like, been like an okay asset, because when you're throwing for 200 yards or sub 200 yards, like Bryce Young has done frequently, there's no trickle down, right? Like, there's no way for guys to produce. But when you are able to push, 280, push 300 yards, that means some other guys are coming along for the ride. And you see a guy like DJ Shark turn his opportunities into actual production. This would be a spot to kind of go back to the well. You're going to still, Bryce Young's going to be just a two QB guy. But I mean, this Jacksonville defense has been so bad, consistently bad. They've allowed, since their bye, they've allowed the highest completion rate in the NFL. They're 31st in yards per pass attempt. They're 30th in touchdown rate allowed. They've allowed 18.2 fantasy points to passers. And the great part about it is they're still really good against the run. Like, they've stopped the runs.
Absolute pass funnel. Yeah.
So they're pushing people to attack them to the one element of their defense isn't good. They should be worse against the run. They should try just letting, Chuba Hubbard rush for some yards in this game.
The Brandon Staley Rams approach. Run for 5 yards a carry.
Please run the ball against us. Please. So I do think it makes a guy like Shark interesting. It is a revenge game too for DJ Shark.
We had to walk down Narrative Street. We had to take a stroll down Narrative Street here.
Anytime you give me the layup, I'm going to take it. You take the free ones. But it does make a guy like him interesting, especially from a DFS stance where we don't have a lot of salary alleviation at the bottom for guys this week. And we want to play a lot of these high price guys. We want to be able to play Christian McCaffrey. We want to be able to play Kyren Williams in lineups this week. So where are our cheap wide receivers? And it does feel point chasey for a guy like Shark. There's definitely a low floor here. But I mean, Jaguars are just getting kind of just beat up by outside wide receivers. And, it happened again last week with Mike Evans, obviously a better player. But I mean, they're 26th in yards per target now, allied to boundary receivers, a 29th in touchdown rate. So definitely is the guy we want to play to. And I'm not going to get to Mingo, right? Like, I don't care what the optimizer tells me. I'm not playing Jonathan Mingo. I'm not doing it. So like Shark would be the one guy I think that becomes a little bit more interesting. If you believe in Bryce Young having kind of access to get, over 250 passing yards in this game.
So I've not run through the optimizers, so I didn't know Mingo was popping up in the
He's just a guy every week that pops like kind of like they try to get you to play him, and every week I'm like X out of ignore player, like removed from field.
I don't know, because I do think maybe people do point chase Chark, and it's not like Mingo didn't get the targets last week, but he had gotten them all before that, and he still ran the same number of routes and played the same number of snaps. I don't know. I might talk myself into Mingo this week and just be absolutely gutted when he finishes 2 for 36, which is what he tends to do. But I do think there's some value in this passing game, and specifically I think in Chark, that is worth looking at, especially like you said, we don't have a ton of low priced people to kind of chase. And so that's somebody I'll be looking at for sure. Moving on to CJ Stroud. Normally, if CJ Stroud was playing a home game against the Titans, we would say that that's a smash spot and we'd be ready to go. But do we have any concerns about him, about how they might approach this game with him coming off what seems like a really serious kind of concussion situation based on what we heard? So are we have more trepidation, more concerns about him than maybe we otherwise would in this matchup?
I think you have to, looking at historically, guys coming back from concussions and their performance and the dip in performance. And, we saw it happen with Trevor Lawrence. Now, granted, he came back, days after, or this is like a 2-week absence, but there is historical, a little bit of drop off. And CJ Stroud, we flippantly, discussed, about like guys pushing through the protocol, but it sounds like by everything that surrounds all the information we've gotten from Stroud's concussion it was very serious. And, he was sensitive to light.
It seemed like a very serious issue.
Over a week was sensitive to light, couldn't even get into meetings because of that. We had to wear the sunglasses around the house and so very serious. So, and with them being home favorites, is it a game where we get pushback? It is an objectively good spot. I do think he's going to make a lot of my tournament pools still, just because of the spot. And if he is fine, more or less, if there's not like a huge hindrance, but I think you have to at least hold it, at least in some regard, give it some respect that he might not be 100%.
What about if you're in a championship and maybe you were able to ride Joe Flacco to the championship game?
I'm playing Stroud
or Baker Joe Mayfield. Flacco. Yeah, I feel like that's where I am too. Like, I still think that I'm playing Stroud there. I'm going to have some concerns, right? But I'm playing Stroud. You and I, despite having the 2 best teams in a league, are beating in the 3rd place game. It'll be fun. That'll be fun for us. And I will be playing CJ Stroud against you in that one. I'm going to go back to him. I think that makes sense. I think in season long, you're just going to have to take the risk because the upside is there. What I will say is the Titans haven't really been getting lit up by opposing quarterbacks, not like we expected. Trevor Lawrence had a big fantasy day, but that was because of 2 rushing touchdowns. Tua Tagovailoa didn't throw a touchdown against them. Their passing defense, especially given the injuries that they have on that defense, their passing defense has not been as bad as I thought that it would be when I was drafting CJ Stroud in my best ball teams, knowing that they played the Titans twice over the final 3 weeks. I thought this Titans defense would be worse than it ended up being. And so maybe this isn't the complete smash spot that it looks like just based on the Titans defense. So there's a lot of mitigating factors, but yeah, I think you're playing him. Finally,
I think the one guy I would think I would play over him still if I had the decision is Matthew Stafford.
Interesting.
Just because he's been so reliable, right? Like, it's just been like this Rams offense has been so good, healthy, and they're just on such a heater. I think he's the one guy I would say I'm going to take the safety net and the kind of built-in upside. He's like the one guy, but I think if you're talking about like the Bakers, the Flaccos of the world, like I think it's pretty clear you just play Stroud.
Stafford, I know that you think that the home road splits for the Giants defense is noise, and that seems fair to me. But the kind of aggressive defense they play does make a little more sense to me that it would be better at home than it would be on the road, just because of the confusion you can cause and the noise and things like that. So that does worry me a little bit on the Rams and going all in on the Rams. Is what if this Giants defense is just better at home? And if that's the case, then you get a little bit of concern. So I don't know where I would go with that one. That would be a very close decision, though. I think so. I'd probably go with Stroud, actually, but that would be a close decision. Finally, here, Mason Rudolph versus George Pickens. I mean, not versus George Pickens. Mason Rudolph and George Pickens. They obviously, George Pickens blew up on Saturday, just completely destroyed the Saturday DFS slate. If you didn't have him, you
No
weren't
money.
you weren't earning any money. We talked earlier about how bad the Bengals defense is. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the last time we kind of got excited about the Steelers offense, it was after they played the Bengals. And it was a one lone good game from Kenny Pickett. They had just fired Matt Canada. The vibes were great. And then it all completely fell apart again. I think that this looks like fool's gold to me, and this is just them taking advantage of what is a really, really good matchup. Do you disagree? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is complete just chasing the more Bengals stuff, right? And this Bengals defense is just down bad. They don't have the depth. They don't have the safety play. It's just been consistently a bad defense, and they're bad against the run. They're bad against the pass. Don't fall for it. Don't fall. And the Seahawks, this Seahawks team has played. They're another team. They've been just a lot better, home defense consistently this season. So yeah, I'm not chasing any of the Steeler stuff. I don't think there's a Steeler I actually willingly want to play. And I know a lot of people have tried to make Jalen Warren a thing. I guess you might get the game script for him, but like the Steelers have consistently shown us all year, like they're not gonna give Jalen Warren access to the touches we want.
Yeah, I don't think we're not going to get the switch that we had hoped. I mean, this isn't a bad rushing matchup for them, but I think your point about are they going to be able to stay in a position in the game in which they can run as much as they want with Harris, run as much as they want with Jalen Warren. I don't know. The Seahawks defense offense hasn't been great with Geno Smith, and so maybe this game just ends up close the whole time. Najee gets enough carries against a defense that is not great, and they're able to get there. I could see that happening, but I mean, you're not particularly excited about it. We have a question here in the chat from Daryl. Dart throws for championship week up against a juggernaut in a deep league. I mean, how deep are we talking? We have some uncut gems later. Mine is super deep. Are there any that just kind of come to the top of your head outside of your uncut gem we'll get to later?
Yeah, my guy's definitely rostered. It's more of like a decision to start sit decision. Guys that might be like we talked about DJ Shark might be available on your waiver wire,
Sure.
right? Like could be out there. Any of these ancillary Broncos guys might be out there if Cortland Sutton doesn't play, and we have Jarrett Stidham, kind of a new variable. There's one more week to lose money on Marvin Mims. Do you play Brandon Johnson? Just kind of chase
Yeah.
like the safety net of his routes. Those guys kind of stand out. We talked about CEH, as like a pickup, for gamers. If they were holding him, I'd have to think. I don't want to stumble over thing, but those are
Sure.
guys that are probably available.
What about
Darius
maybe
Slayton.
Traylon Burks? Yeah, Darius Slayton, that's a good one. What about like Traylon Burks? If they get Will Levis back, can he get a big play against this Texans
Mm-hmm.
defense? That might be interesting. Yeah, I'm just kind of going through the schedule and trying to think about who is actually available. But in your deep leagues, there's just aren't a ton of people available, and that becomes the issue for sure. Then we have a question here from Dylan. Need help setting the lineup? Um, Oh, well, he didn't actually. There's no question there. All right, ask the question, Dylan. We'll get back to you here in a second. All right, Lions Cowboys. I want to move on to that one. The Lions Cowboys. I guess the second biggest game of the week. Actually, what is the biggest game of the week? Is it Lions Cowboys or is it Dolphins Ravens? That's an interesting question.
Well, real
That
life gotta be Dolphins Ravens, right?
Yeah, but fantasy, I think it's Lions Cowboys, which unfortunately we're getting in on Saturday night. You're gonna have to, if you want to play this in DFS, you're either gonna have to play the whole thing, or I guess you're gonna have to play Showdown, which I know you're not interested in that at all. Playing
I'm not a
Showdown.
showdown. I'm too much of an objective thinker. So like I've never been a good showdown player. And I also don't like losing money. So when I found out I was a bad showdown player, or like when you self-assess and you say, where am I
Yeah.
losing money? And I found out I was losing money in showdown. I said, maybe I shouldn't do that.
If you should do that. And maybe I should make fun of all of the showdown degens in the Slack
But
every
some people have
every week.
like a great like third eye for like showdown stuff. And
Yeah.
like Adam, like we have a great guy, like Adam is great at it. And like I
Yeah.
don't have that kind of, because I'm too much of a in the box thinker.
Yeah, by the way, if you're interested in Showdown, Adam Wild does Showdown breakdowns for us. He has one for the Thursday night game. If you're listening to us live and listening to this on Thursday, he has one for the Thursday night game. We'll have one actually for this Lions and Cowboys game. So that content will be available to you over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. The other thing we have available at Sharp Football Analysis is we have our postseason packages. Our postseason packages are now available. Included in those is the rest of the NFL regular season, as well as our college bowl recommendations. We're already 3-0 on those. If you sign up for a weekly package right now, you'll get your first week at 71% off. Why 71% off? Because we've gone 56-23 on our elevated plays since November 1st, which is a 71% success rate. Now we're going to pass that savings on to you. You can go to sharp.football to learn more. Use code GET71 to take advantage of this tremendous deal. Lots of stuff over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. So make sure you go and check it out. All right, Lions Cowboys. We'll get into it here with the Lions and Cowboys. I guess my first question is, how confident are we in Dak Prescott against this defense? We had Dak Prescott. He was just smashing for fantasy. We've seen over the last 2 weeks, both road games. I don't believe that's a coincidence. We've seen over the last 2 weeks, he has not been as good from a fantasy perspective. Now he's coming home. Now he gets to play indoors against this Lions defense. It feels like an absolute smash spot, but are we a little bit worried after what we've seen over the last 2 weeks?
You know, our guy Rob Coakley brought up on a show I was on last night that it's actually kind of cool that this game is Saturday night, because it kind of rips the Band-Aid off for like all you best ball bros that have stacked around this game. Like, you just know it's not like the hammer, right? Like how Bills
Yeah.
Bengals was looking last year. Like, you just kind of, like I said, he called it ripping the Band-Aid off. We know what those teams did like immediately. So it's kind of fun. That is kind of an isolation game, but we're definitely confident in the passing game on the Dallas side here. I mean, this Lions pass defense is just one we've targeted the back half of the season regularly. And Dak has been not just a home road split driven guy, but like matchup driven. I mean, he's very matchup driven over the back half of the season when he's been on this heater. I mean, you look at all of his down weeks, they've come in spots where he might be slowed down. He wasn't actually bad last week. Like, getting 18.5 fantasy points is pretty solid for the outcome there. Just didn't get the spike week. But since week 9, since their bye, the Lions 8.4 yards per pass attempt, 30th in the league, 28th in touchdown rate allowed. This is just a spot where I think Dak absolutely mashes. The CeeDee Lamb stuff, we were talking about it in like our player prop chat, like our own little personal like Discord kind of area. I mean, CeeDee Lamb's receiving yardage line in sports books is 100.5 yards. His anytime touchdown prop is minus 175. Which for a wide receiver is pretty wild to see. Like, we see Christian McCaffrey have some
That's
negative
a McCaffrey number. Exactly.
Like, and like minus 175 for a wide receiver is pretty lofty. And we've seen the Lions give some massive games to wide receivers since their bye. I mean, Keenan Allen, 11 for 175 and 2 touchdowns. DJ Moore got them twice. Olave over 100 yards. Justin Jefferson just most recently with Nick Mullins had 140 yards and a touchdown. So I am confident in those two Dallas sides guys. But like, what do you do? Like, if you made it with Tony Pollard, how do you play Tony Pollard in this game? How do you like willingly set him in a lineup at this point? If you made it there. And I do have, me being the kind of in on Tony Pollard, I have multiple championship teams with Tony Pollard. You could have done it, gamers. You still could have done it, but I'm not playing him. I mean, Detroit, we've seen it again. We talked about Ty Chandler last week, not wanting to play him in DFS, not wanting to play him. And he sucked out a touchdown and still had single-digit fantasy points with a touchdown. Impressively hard to do. But this Detroit
it still wasn't a good fantasy game.
Yeah.
Like, he got into the end zone and I go, well, I guess not having any Chandler is going to be a problem for me. And then it was fine. There was no concerns at all that he scored because there was nothing else the rest of the game.
I mean, Detroit's good against, they don't give up receiving points to running backs either, which is the out you might try to talk yourself into. And so, yeah, I think it's just a Dak CD Lamb game, and you might get some ancillary runoff. I think Jake Ferguson is a guy, obviously your gamers are just playing, and he looks good in single game DFS stuff, and you might get the Brandon Cooks touchdown one off.
Yeah, I think that's where we are as well. I do I also think it's interesting with this matchup is that the one thing that the Lions defense does well in the passing game that you might actually worry about is they get pressure. Over the last 5 games, they're actually fifth in the league in pressure rate, but Dak Prescott is really good against pressure. So even what the Lions do well, they're not going to mess with this pass offense. They're not going to mess with this with Dak Prescott or CD Lamb or any of those, those secondary options. But I do think from a running perspective, I don't know how you can trust Tony Pollard at this point, which is kind of the opposite of the Lions run game, because even though, maybe this matchup isn't as bad as it looks, or it's not as good as it looks based on kind of what we saw from the Bills with James Cook, right? This still is a team the Cowboys can be beat on the ground. And most importantly, the Lions have run on everybody. And I wonder if they're going to try to take some of what the Bills did and try to take that game plan and control this game, because their defense is not going to be able to slow down the Dallas passing attack. I just don't think that's going to happen. So I
Yeah.
wonder if they're going to take, especially early in this game, the approach to try to run on this team, recreate what we saw with James Cook, and see what they could do, because I think that this team should be able to run on the Cowboys.
Yeah, you said they've run on everybody. I mean, they've had the last month some tougher matchups from a top-down perspective against the Bears twice, the Vikings last week, and they've consistently run the football on everybody, and they've run it successfully. I think they're going to be able to run it successfully here too. Like, granted, like the Cowboys maybe never give up the 270 they gave up to the Bills, but that doesn't mean that we can't see a successful run game, and both of these guys kind of get there for fantasy. They both still are a little bit more touchdown dependent, but they keep scoring touchdowns. So it is what it is, because we would love just for it to be one of these guys. I mean, oh my goodness, if this backfield was just one guy, this
If it
guy
was
would
just
be
Gibbs,
it would be,
it'd be
but they would
unbelievable.
be in CMC Kyron Williams territory. And we
Yep.
saw it a little bit with Montgomery for like the 2-game absence Gibbs had earlier in the year. But my goodness, if it was one guy, this guy would be just absolutely crushing for fantasy. So there's a little fragility for the touchdowns if we do run into a game where one of these guys doesn't score. But I think that's clearly the play through here is the Lions backs.
And I think it's more fragile for Montgomery, because if this
The
script
cat
gets out of
passes.
hand for them, and let's say Goff turns the ball over a couple times early, which is imminently possible against this defense and the way he handles pressure, that he turns the ball over a couple, the game script gets out of hand and they have to throw more. Gibbs is not going to be killed by that script, whereas
Mhm.
Montgomery will. And so Montgomery is really the more fragile piece of this. But that also makes him more interesting, I guess, if you're trying to predict that this game will go a different way, if you're looking for leverage points. Because if the Lions are able to control this game the way the Bills did, then this game is not going to get to what we're expecting from a game total perspective. And if it doesn't get to what we're expecting from a game total perspective, then that's probably good news for Montgomery, who might be, it's probably less popular. And so that's kind of just the game theory through there. I did mention Goff. I mean, this seems like a really bad matchup for Goff. At least it's indoors. But against this team, with how much they play man coverage and how much pressure they get, this could quietly be a rough place for Goff, especially with the turnover issues we've seen over the last 5 or 6 weeks or so.
Yeah, I mean, Goff's been very boom or bust, anyways. The highs are good. It's gonna be interesting too, because this is another one of those spots again. Like the Lions are in one of these teams. They're one of these teams, right? Like, please show us something against a good opponent. Like that's where we are. Like they haven't in these spots punched up and had good games. So this will be we're right to proceed with trepidation, especially with everything on the line, right? Like this is a team that hasn't performed well in these spots this year. They went to Baltimore and got absolutely flooded. That's really the only spot that they've really had since earlier in the year. They haven't really been challenged, but we don't want that to be an outcome.
Yeah, they're in this weird spot of they're tied for the league. They're tied for the number one seed in the NFC. I'm pretty sure, if I'm remembering correctly, that that's where they are. And I don't think anybody treats them that way at all. Rightfully so, because like you said, they haven't done it. This is an important game for them. This is an important
Yes.
game for Dan Campbell's coach of the year candidacy. This is an important game for that. If they come into this game and get absolutely smashed by the Cowboys, which I think is well within the realm of possibilities, I think Warren Sharp, I think, brought up yesterday on a call taking some alternate line on the Cowboys, which I think is a great idea. Like there's some interesting stuff here that you could do.
Yeah, if you're
And
Stefanski better, this is your Saturday.
yeah, absolutely. Like this is going to be an interesting game. All right, so let's move on and talk about a few of the questions we got here. Dylan got a question in. There's a lot there, Dylan. So I'm not going to answer all of that, but I do think there's two interesting questions in here. The first is Stroud versus Fields for the quarterback spot. Do you have any strong takes on that one? I mean, Fields, the Atlanta defense is, pretty good, but Fields obviously has that rushing upside. He's been all over the map since he's returned. It seems like DJ Moore is fine, so I guess that's going to be fine. But Cole Kmet missed practice yesterday, so that's an interesting one. I'm not sure where I would go with that. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think a lot depends on how healthy those two guys are, and it's not a spot I imagine like a high ceiling game for Fields too. It'd be more of like I'm a favorite. I just want to get out with like my back end QB1 points that Fields could get, but I definitely am hesitant on Fields this week for sure.
And then we have here, I think just the flex spot is really what's open for his team. So we've got Singletary, Jerome Ford, Jaden Reed. I think that's what it's going to come down to because I can't imagine Waddle plays. That's really tough for me. Is it maybe Singletary with how much he's dominated the work recently, especially if we have these questions about CJ Stroud and what they're going to do? I think it's probably for me, it's Devin Singletary. You have any strong thoughts on that?
If it's PPR, I definitely still think the matchup lines up for Jaden Reed pretty well. Because if you are playing Stroud, I mean, you're playing Stroud and Singletary in the same lineup is almost a hedge. But so that'd be maybe one of the things to kind of think about. But the rest of it, I mean, you're playing all these other guys, like you said. It just is a flex spot type of situation.
Yeah, I think flex is really your only option here because of
I'm
Waddle.
not playing Jerome Ford tonight. I'll tell you that.
He was not in my thinking when I was looking at that flex spot.
It would be Singletary or Reed for me. Would be the two guys.
And then we have one here from Jamin. Need to pick between two of the following. So I guess two of the following: CEH, Mixon, Pollard, Flowers, Chuba. I mean, at this point, we're in on CAH, aren't we? Aren't we?
Well, you gotta wait. Yeah, you gotta at least wait it out to see where you are.
So Pollard, we mentioned him. We're not feeling great about that. Flowers, it's not a great matchup. Mixon has been losing work to Chase Brown, and it's not a great matchup. Chuba gets all the carries, but we don't know. I mean, we've talked about that not being a good matchup. This is tough. Is it CEH and Mixon? Is that where we are? Is that those two?
If it's not, if we don't have Pacheco, I think CH is a lock by default, a home favorite. I think the other guy I would probably just go with in full point PPR would probably be, oh man, I don't know. I probably would play Tony Pollard over these other guys. We said about sitting him, but I still, 6 point home favorite. 6 point home favorite. I would just let Jesus take the wheel, I think. And between the other guys.
I do think that's where we are with the rest of them, and even CEH to that perspective. But like all of these players have red flags at this point. And Zay Flowers has been catching touchdowns lately, but that wasn't the case before. You kind of probably still need that from him. Like I said, Chuba gets a ton of work. It's not a good matchup at going up against a pass funnel kind of team. It's tough.
And the Dolphins are a legit good boundary matchup for wide receivers, where the 49ers, you can at least, like on Monday night with Zay Flowers, you say like, if the Ravens are going to have success, it's going to be like where the 49ers have been their most vulnerable, right? Like the 49ers only give up fantasy points to like really outside wide receivers or good tight ends. That's really the only thing. But you want to attack the 49ers in pass game. This Dolphins pass defense, man,
ever since Jalen Ramsey got back, it's good.
It's been legit. And they've got good personnel. We talked about, they haven't faced the hardest schedule, but they also don't let any of those downtrotters punch up, which means something.
Yeah. Actually, let's get right into that game. Jeff, I see your question. We'll get to it here in a second after we do Ravens Dolphins. Let's get right into that game talking about the Dolphins. And I think that's a point you brought up in the worksheet. It's something we talked about last week, that the Dolphins hadn't played anybody. And so that raises questions about how good their defense actually is. But I think that you and I both agreed on this. we thought this defense would be good, both because of the coaching staff and because of the players they have. And then we saw them play really well against the Cowboys last week. And I think we're at the point here where we think that this Dolphins defense is good, especially when they have Jalen Ramsey healthy and available. And that presents issues for this Ravens team because when I look at, they had a lot of success. They played really well against the 49ers. Lamar Jackson is an MVP candidate, the MVP favorite at this point. I think this offense is good, but when I look at the receivers and when I look at the options in the passing game, even though I like Zay Flowers, I don't know if Zay Flowers is that guy that's just going to make things happen. Odell's not even playing that much. He's playing as much as Nelson Aguilar. We haven't seen Bateman become the player we hoped. Isaiah Likely is fine, but he's not Mark Andrews. Like, there are lots of questions with the surrounding pieces around Lamar, which we hoped at least was not going to be a problem coming into the year. But here we are. They're still the best team in football. They're still the number one seed, but we have questions about that. And they're going up against a good defense. That leads to me having some concerns about what this offense is going to do this week.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit similar to where the Cowboys were with the Dolphins last week. But also last week, just what a tremendous spot. Like, just times and true. Like, you bet Lamar Jackson in those spots. Getting 5 points with Lamar Jackson, just what an auto bet. It's you just take him. It's like when Mahomes is a short dogger getting points. You just bet those spots. Another game he delivers. Yeah,
he wins.
And he beats good defenses, like always. That's another spot here. So I mean, short home favorite. I mean, I think Baltimore probably still objectively looks good. It's the strength of Lamar Jackson, right? The rushing or him making plays. And finding a way to get Nelson Aguilar a touchdown. I think that's what we're looking at with the Ravens, right? Like, it's a sum of parts game for them. They probably don't have an individual fantasy asset that is great in this game, but as a sum of parts, Lamar probably makes enough plays and does enough things to make this, put the Ravens in a position to either win this game outright or even cover this game. So, yeah, I mean, I'm playing Lamar Jackson. The rest of the guys I do have questions with. Zay Flowers, I think, is fine as a wide receiver 3+ type of guy. You do need the touchdowns. He hasn't had an 80-yard receiving game, but the targets since Mark Andrews has been injured have been there 3 of the 4 games. Like 27% target share, 25% target share, 38% target share. He has 4 end zone targets over his span. He didn't have an end zone target with Mark Andrews in the field. So I do think he's overall more or less fine, but without a touchdown, he's very low ceiling-ish.
Yeah, I think that's where I am with basically all of.
Well, Likely, I think, is a good
play
play as well, though. I think Likely is probably their best objective play.
Yeah, especially given the relative weakness at tight end. Now we don't even have TJ Hawkinson. I think that's fair as well. Talking a little bit about the Ravens backfield, you're not going to get excited about either of these guys. You're hopeful that Edwards gets in the end zone. That's really what you're looking for. I did think it was interesting, though, that I thought Justice Hill was going to play more snaps because that's where he is and that's his role in this backfield. The fact that he led the backfield in carries, he had 10 carries and Edwards had 9, that is not exactly what I expected. And I did hope that we would get Edwards more, especially in a game that they were winning throughout. I was hoping we'd get Edwards more into like that 13 to 15 carry range, which smooths out some of that touchdown variance that we get. And we didn't get that last week. And that, especially in that game script, is a concern for Edwards moving forward. And it means he's kind of just what he was whenever Keaton Mitchell was healthy, which I was hoping for a little bit more over these final few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it's what we know. It's the Gus Bedford experience. This coaching staff this was always the problem with Keaton Mitchell, too, and getting really excited as good as he was this coaching staff likes Justice Hill. They trust him. They trust him on the field, and this is always going to be a problem. So you get Gus is literally just that touchdown or bust kind of entity. That's what stinks. Although we have seen him have some huge receptions this year. He had an 80-yarder against the Lions earlier in the year, and he had a nice 40-yarder last week. So it's nice to see Gus catch the ball a little bit.
It's like they don't actually realize that he can catch the ball, and so randomly he's just wide open in space because they're like, "Oh yeah, I guess you do catch the ball every now and again." And there you go. He beat his receiving over for us on one catch, so we appreciate that, Gus. That's very good for us. All right, let's move on to the Dolphins side. I mean, Tyreek Hill splits without Jalen Waddle. I'm just going to let you go read out some Tyreek Hill splits without Jalen Waddle, and then we'll move on because there's no reason to talk about how good of a play he is this week.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be the great if we don't get Waddle, which have to believe we won't. Like the DFS conundrum of trying to get the CMC versus the Commanders or Tyreek Hill or trying to find a way to get both. It's gonna be rough. But Tyreek Hill has run 120 routes with Jalen Waddle off the field this year, like 120, like not a small, like a smallish sample. It's not like a 30 or a game's worth, but he's been targeted on 47.5% of those routes. 5.15 yards per route run, 40% of team targets, 55% of the team air yards. When Waddle missed week 3, he caught 9 of 11 targets for 157 yards and a touchdown. He ran 21 routes in that game, just 21 routes. And we've seen Mike McDaniel when Tyreek Hill missed 2 weeks ago at Jalen Waddle. Like he consistently can get the football to these guys, and no matter what the matchup is. And the Ravens are a team that have allowed some spike weeks to wide receivers too as well. So I mean, if we don't get Jalen Waddle, which I think we're all expecting, like this could put Tyreek back in the conversation of maybe getting the record, although I think it's probably out of the realm of possibility this time. But there's like still a percentile chance this week could be a bonanza game.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. I mean, if you're going to get Tyreek Hill getting the ball that much, I do think we should put into perspective those numbers that you said, because you said what, 47 and a half target rate per route. Was that the
Yeah,
number? So
on
when we're
120
talking about like
routes.
the most targeted wide receivers in the league, we're talking about like 30% target rate per route, right? And so maybe getting closer to 35, but that's very rare. And so this 45, that's he's being targeted on nearly half his routes. If he's going to in this game, if we expect this game to be close, which it wasn't the last time we didn't have Jalen Waddle, if we expect this game to be close and he's going to run, let's say, 40 pass routes, like it's probably not going to get to 20 targets, but that's the kind of volume we're talking about with Tyreek Hill, who makes big plays happen. I there's That's
And
pretty
it's
simple. That's
consistent.
pretty
We saw
straightforward.
the same thing. We saw
Yeah.
Waddle get targeted on half his routes when Tyreek Hill missed. Like Mike McDaniel can get these guys the football schematically.
Yeah.
And he's
It's
going to,
going
and
to
he's
be
going to
interesting.
drive the ball through them. I mean, we've got this running back situation where all these guys are just nicked up right now. And it could be
Yeah.
just kind of a mess this week where we just hope Mostert keeps scoring touchdowns.
I do think, speaking of that running game, there's going to be an article that comes out at some point this week on sharpfootballanalysis.com that I think you should read from Warren Sharp, raising the question about would San Francisco have been better off leaning heavily on the run early against the Ravens, because the Ravens love to play with light boxes. But it seems like they can be run out of that. If the Colts basically did that in the win they had over the Ravens, the Browns to a lesser degree did the same thing to them as well. And if you're able to run them out of the way the Ravens like to play defense, they are more vulnerable to the pass. They are vulnerable to the pass when they play with 7 or 8 men in the box. And the change is dramatic. They go from being an elite pass defense with light boxes to more of a middling one with 7 in the box, and then one of the worst in the league when they have to stack the box. And so the Dolphins are the kind of team that is going to recognize that and going to know that. And so the 49ers would have been as well, but maybe the 49ers were blinded by this, trying to prove Brock Purdy is actual MVP candidate, and didn't do maybe what they should have done, which when they did and they lined up with 2 running backs and they ran, they had a lot of success in that game. And so there is a part of me that's like, even though the running backs are banged up, even though the offensive line is banged up, are they going to try to get the Ravens out of this defense that they like to run and maybe see what they can do there? So that's just something to keep an eye on in this game, and maybe something to a pivot, a leverage play you could have in this game off Tyreek, because maybe they're just going to run the ball a lot. But also, their running backs and line aren't healthy, so maybe they just can't do that. It's just an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, that's the thing we talked about last week coming in Dallas, and everyone wanting to kind of glom on and chase what the Bills did, and this offensive line is just in such a bad spot right now, and then now that all their running backs are nicked up, so
Mhm. It's
I'm
just
definitely not counting on Jeff Wilson to grind it down the Ravens' throats.
that would be really fun if we had just a throwback Jeff Wilson in San Francisco game in which he gets 26 carries for 93 yards and 2 touchdowns. That would be really a fun way to end the fantasy regular season. All right, we had a question here from Jeff. Amari Cooper, Devontae Adams, or James Cook for flex in a half point PPR. First of all, that's your flex. Congratulations. I can see why you're in the championship game. This seems to me, based on matchup and based on kind of what we've seen quarterback play in with the Raiders, this seems to me like James Cook, even though it's not an objectively great spot for him. Is that kind of where you are as well?
Yeah, I'd be between James Cook, Devontae Adams, Amari would be third, I think, on that list. Um, I don't know if it's full point PPR or what it is, but yeah, I would lean James Cook here. Huge home favorite, just objectively kind of something we. And although the Patriots are good against the run, they are one of these teams that do have the splits where they give up receiving work to running backs. Unlike the Lions and stuff like that. So it is a good spot for James Cook, I think, overall to have like a floor game.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what you're looking for him because I mean,
I think
so
all
the
those guys
Patriots.
really is what you're looking for. Who's the best median projection?
Exactly, because I do think there's going to be floor from all of them, but I do think, I mean, the Patriots offense. Say what you will about what the Patriots offense has been this year. The Patriots defense is real. It's legit. It's playing great. It has kept them into games even with their offensive struggles. So I would be a little bit. I'd be at least a little bit worried about it. But yeah, home favorite. Patriots can't score. Hey, Bailey's happy. I don't know, it's been fine. But yeah, I'm gonna like Cook there for sure. We don't need to talk about this game long, but I do think it's fun to ask how many points are the 49ers going to score this week against the Commanders? All right, here's a better question. They're going to score a lot of points, especially coming off this loss. I bet they really want to press the gas and score a lot of points. They're going to score a ton of points against this defense. We have to pick which players we think are really going to have the blow up games. You have any guesses? Like if you were just looking at the matchups, who do you think? McCaffrey, obviously, but who among those pass catchers are we really banking on having a true ceiling game in this matchup?
I would lean Ayuk, but again, like all these guys outside of CMC, that's why I think from a stacking perspective for DFS, you can play Purdy with Christian McCaffrey and just get a monopoly on all the touchdowns. Obviously,
Yeah.
you're not getting like the double bubble unless he throws into McCaffrey, but you don't have to play the whack-a-mole game of which 49er efficiently turns 7 targets into 100 yards because it's going to, 2 of them probably will and 1
Yeah.
won't. But I think from a DFS perspective, that's what makes like playing Purdy with McCaffrey, you just find a way to get congeal all the touchdowns.
Yeah, you definitely end up with all the touchdowns there. I do think you're right about Ayuk. This feels more like an Ayuk game.
That's where we've
But I
attacked
mean,
the
we saw,
Commanders.
yeah, but we saw Debo get a ton of targets last week. It didn't work out because things weren't going well. But Debo has definitely been more of like the target hog the last few weeks, so we could see that. With Kittle, I don't know with Kittle. I mean, flip a coin with George
From an
Kittle.
early
It seems like
ownership perspective, Kittle, so CMC is projected obviously to be the highest roster, all
sure.
these guys. And then Kittle is projected to be the second highest rostered guy.
The thing with Kittle is every time I think it's a Kittle week, it doesn't work out. And then weeks where I'm like, I don't know if this is going to be a Kittle week, he goes for whatever he did this last week with 127 yards or whatever it was. So I don't know. No idea is my answer for
But
Kittle.
they're
But yeah, I think
very rarely do any of those guys get double digit targets, which makes it so frustrating with this offense. It's all efficiency based, and you kind of have to do a little guesswork of who can make the most out of this marginal amount of opportunity. And it's hard for because they're all expensive too. So when you are stacking these guys, you are foregoing salary to get those guys. That's what makes it such so hard to stack Purdy on a weekly basis.
yeah, that's where we are. But I mean, also they might just score 60. And so it'll be fine. Everybody will get a touchdown and then we'll be happy. All right, let's move on here to Uncut Gems, talking about a player or two that maybe is a little bit more under the radar that we think is in a good spot. Who do you got this week?
I have Jaxon Smith-Njigba just kind of as like that, maybe you're thinking about playing him or you're not thinking about playing him. You don't know. Just a guy that's really kind of passed the eyeball test the back half of the season that did not the front half of the season. We kind of didn't know what his role was in the offense. He had like this low ADOT. He was getting a bunch of targets behind the line of scrimmage. Back half of the season, he's kind of manifested into like a foxhole player. He now leads the Seahawks in receptions and yards on third down. He's been a wide receiver 3 or better now in 3 of his past 4 games. And from a matchup signal, there is multiple kind of paths here for, I think, him to be successful. I mean, the Steelers are 7th in the NFL in rate of man coverage. He is 2nd on the team in target rate against man coverage. He's been targeted on 26% of his routes against man coverage. He also is playing 67% of his snaps in the slot, where the Pittsburgh Steelers are allowing a league high 10 yards per pass attempt. So not much of a ceiling guy, but definitely a guy, if you're on the fence of not, haven't been playing, he's been just occupying a roster spot, it might be a spot where he contributes to a championship this weekend.
I'm going to go not a little bit. I'm going to go a lot
You're
deeper
a lot
here.
deeper.
I assume that if you're in a championship game, you're not having to dig this deep. Although we did have that question earlier from Daryl about some dart throws. This definitely qualifies as that. This is more of a DFS kind of idea. It looks like Ja'Marr Chase is going to miss another week. And if that happens, we saw last week that Andrei Isoivas, which I think I'm getting right, Andrei Isoivas had a lot of work and saw a lot of work last week. He timed for the lead in targets with T. Higgins. He ran a route on 75.6% of his dropbacks. He was targeted on 23.5% of his routes. And the thing about this Chiefs defense, they're very good at shutting down wide receiver ones, which means you're going to get a little bit more production from those secondary players. I played him in fantasy in DFS last week. He did not get me as many points as I had hoped, but I think the usage was good there. I think that the Chiefs offense is actually going to be good this week. So the Bengals are going to have to throw. Again, that secondary option against the Chiefs, that's kind of been the way to go. There's a lot of things pointing me here to Isoivas if Ja'Marr Chase is once again out this week. And I mean, like you said, we're looking for cheap options in DFS, and this is definitely one of those. So that's kind of where I am with him. Are you playing him in a 12-team league? Absolutely not. But that's if you're digging really deep, I think that he's at least interesting there. We do have one more question here. You have a lean on Ridley versus Garrett Wilson. Given how well the Browns play at home and how bad the quarterback play is for the Jets, and how many targets Ridley is getting without Christian Kirk, even though it's not a great matchup and they might not get pushed as much, I think I go with Ridley in that situation. Where are you?
Yeah, I would ask my league if I can combine both of their points this week. But yeah, I absolutely
You're that out on Ridley.
No, I'm not that. I think it's probably like a high target game for Ridley. I am very concerned about this Trevor Lawrence situation because this dude's going to try to play with no arm.
He already could not throw accurately down the field.
He's not going to miss this game. He hasn't missed a game. We thought he was going to miss 4 different games this year, and he hasn't missed one of them. I'm just assuming he's going to play with his arm taped to his shoulder. And but I definitely don't want to play Garrett Wilson in this matchup though either.
No, I don't. I'm going to rely on Ridley getting 12 targets against not a bad defense, but against a more exploitable defense than
if we don't have J.C. Horn, J.C. Horn left last week's game. C.J. Henderson didn't play, so definitely. I am concerned about the Trevor Lawrence thing though.
I do think it's gone under the radar that since his ankle injury, Trevor Lawrence has been bad throwing the ball more than 10 yards down the field, like wildly inaccurate. If you look at Calvin Ridley's inaccurate target rate since that ankle injury, it's been bad. Now we're adding a shoulder injury to that as well. It's what if the Panthers beat the Jaguars this week? That would be wild if they beat them. One more here before we get out from Jordan. 2 more. They're coming in.
They can't lose the pick, right? They can't lose the first pick, the Panthers, can they?
Oh yeah, they absolutely could. If they win the last 2, I mean, aren't the
where's Arizona?
Aren't the Cardinals sitting there at 3 losses?
Oh yeah, they're one game difference.
Yeah, sitting there at 3 losses. Playing Kyler and Jets defense, who do I play in standard scoring? Trey McBride or David Njoku?
I don't just Trey McBride.
I don't know. Getting away from David Njoku right now with the streak he's on and the way that passes get funneled to tight ends in New York.
I mean, from a game environment stance, that Eagles Cardinals game is going to be way better to target than this Jets Browns game.
Yeah, you convinced me, Trey McBride. I do really like Njoku. You might be able to play one of them in the flex. I think Njoku has a good game tonight. He will be my captain, actually, and primary captain in my showdown lineups. And then one more here. Would you start KJ Osborne or Romeo Doubs? He has Keenan Allen.
We didn't mention KJ Osborne as being a guy that's available. He is another guy that's probably available in your league because if Addison's not going to play and Hawkinson's not going to play, like he default becomes the secondary target in that offense. A team that throws a lot, they are aggressive. None of these tight ends, Johnny Munt and Josh Oliver, are not the guy. They're not going to command the targets TJ Hawkinson did.
How dare you talk about my draft crush Josh Oliver like that? But how many years are we going back with that draft crush? It must be 5 years
paid,
now.
Baby. You got that crush. Money.
I think I would go Osborne. We have a history of him doing this in fantasy playoffs already. Mm-hmm. We've seen him late in seasons whenever given the opportunity have big games. We saw it last week. He also has Gerald Everett or Juwan Johnson. He had Hawkinson. I mean, I don't know, man. I guess Juwan Johnson at least ran routes last week, so that's promising. They might have to throw in that game.
I mean, Gerald Everett. That's literally whoever scores a touchdown question. Like neither, yeah.
Gerald Everett will probably get more targets, but he will probably have like 4 catches for 30 yards. Maybe that's good enough in full PPR. I do think that Juwan Johnson has a better chance to get the touchdown. But yeah, you're hoping for the best in that one for sure. All right. Sorry, y'all. We're out of time. We got to go. We really appreciate y'all staying in the chat. Like I said, we're going to keep this going throughout the playoffs. Come and join us. Ask questions. We'll be happy to answer them. Remember to go to sharpfootballanalysis.com. Have that deal running on the weekly playoff package. If you get the playoff package, you actually get the final couple of weeks of Rich's content, fantasy content for free. Make sure you go and check that out. And we will be back to talk with you next week.